I felt like I'd learnt more there about what makes a good agency and what makes a good presentation than I had 2 years agency side. Creative thinking, creative inspiration is such a key part of research because quite often it's the thing that clients can't access themselves, do the work extremely well, but also knowing that the work is just one part of a much bigger picture.
Welcome to the Early Insights podcast, where we get the chance to learn more about the careers of the brightest and best in the world of market research and insights. I'm your host, Lewis Reeves, founder and CEO at Walla. And today we have an incredibly interesting guest with a wide range of experience already and a passion for driving our sector forward. Welcome, Sam Salama.
Thank you very much.
Sam, so much for us to talk about today. A reasonably short career, but you've done a lot. I'm keen to take us back to the very, very beginning. Sam is sat there finishing his A-levels, thinking about what he does next in life. Take us to that place. Where was your head? What did you end up doing? And what did you think that was going to lead to in your life?
Well, I think it certainly wasn't leading towards market research. I think at that point I knew I was passionate about French. I loved French language, French culture, so I did that at university. And quite often, I was actually doing a careers evening the other week and had a lot of kids come up to me saying, "You did French, what can I do with that? Am I going to be a teacher? Am I going to be a translator?" It's not often linked to market research or to business. But the reason I loved it, apart from all the language bits, is you get to do a year abroad. So I spent a year working in Paris.
Amazing.
I did a 6-month stint at Michelin, the tyre company, which is slightly random, but doing more consultancy work with them.
Interesting.
And then I spent 6 months at Ogilvy consulting, which I think I was already interested in behavioural science and nudge theory, which was getting quite big at the time.
Yeah.
And that was where I got the chance to actually do it myself and see how it links to brands and how people make decisions. And I just really found it really, really interesting and then thought, okay, let's do something in that.
And those roles with Michelin and Ogilvy, had you pre-prepared them whilst you were at university thinking about going to Paris for that year?
Yeah, exactly. So you have to do a bit of prep to make sure that they can hire you and accept you. But because it's an internship, it's fairly informal. But it was really just based on a whim. As I said, I liked Nudge. I'd read Nudge, the book. I think I'd read Thinking Fast and Slow and thought, this sounds quite interesting. So I did that. And then spent 6 months there, loved it, and then thought, okay, I want to go into this when I finish uni and start working.
Yeah.
So I joined a company called Mountainview, which is a marketing science consultancy.
Sure.
And they do a lot of work around how brands grow and how people make decisions and how that links to comms. So very academic, very technical, and really enjoyed that, loved that, and thought, okay, I quite like research. I then joined an agency, did a couple of years there, and thought, okay, now I want to do client-side research, get a different angle, and now I'm at the Met Police. So it's been an interesting journey. I think research and understanding people has always been at the heart of it, but it's really just been a case of me thinking, I enjoy this, I want to do something new that's similar, and let's move on. So it's never been pre-planned. I'm just here for a variety of different decisions.
And beyond the time working in Paris for those businesses we mentioned earlier, how much have you used your French degree in your market research career?
Good question. I would say not loads, not directly. I've not really worked with French companies or had to use it. But what I would say, and again, I was saying this at the careers I did a few weeks ago, is that I think it's definitely given me a lot of skills that I probably wouldn't have had, because a lot of it is not just looking at translations, it's understanding cultures and speaking to people and understanding how people live in different cultures. A lot of empathy, I think, is really key, critical thinking. So it's not been the most direct result. I wouldn't say I've used it in my job that much, but I'd say I probably wouldn't be here without it. So it's a shame, actually. It's on a slight tangent. I think languages are not very popular at the moment. A lot of people want to do maths, engineering, science, but I think people are missing out by not thinking about something like that, which is a bit more human-centric.
Incredibly interesting. I think particularly in this age of AI, is people's desire to learn a lot of things, particularly languages. They just lean on technology to do it for them. And particularly that cultural component, which is so critical to the work we do in market research. Yeah. So coming back to those early days, you join Mountainview, and you start learning the core basics of market research. To talk us about that development and some of those skill sets that you started building then.
Yeah, so as I said, it's a very interesting company. It's very academic. A lot of the work is linked to the book How Brands Grow, which, if you've heard of it, is one of the biggest, I think, marketing books of the last 20 years. Very much looking at hard data, how brands grow, things like penetration, things like loyalty, all of these important metrics. So it's very technical, and I think what's really interesting is just how it shows people's decision making, and despite all of these different factors like culture and competition and different sectors, actually a lot of how brands grow can be predicted and can be mapped and can be quantified. So I think I really got a sense of the power of research and the power of understanding people. And a big part of it as well was then linking that to comms. So if you understand how people make decisions, you can see how comms and advertising can be effective. So we did a big teaching module on taking people from the brain, actual brain science, all the way to how people notice information and then how you can use that as a brand. So I think that mix between the science and then the commercial bit, I think is fascinating. And that's something that I've always tried to think about. So if I'm doing a more commercial brand-led project, understanding the people, but if you're doing more of a cultural project about people, then thinking about what brands can do as well. So it's always the commercial and cultural bit which come together, which I really like.
And let's lean into a little bit, what sort of size was the Mountainview team, and how did that play into your development, but also your exposure to end clients and so on?
So it was small. I think it was maybe 8 or 9, changed a bit when I was there, but it was very small, which is I think is good and bad. Bad because you don't have too many people to lean on, but good because you can do it yourself. And I think if you are quite proactive and you want to get stuck in, it's really useful. So I got a lot of good exposure to different clients.
Amazing.
I think I ended up doing some training and teaching modules probably a bit too early on. I probably didn't have the relevant experience for it. But then you do adapt and you think, I'm going to have to do this. What am I going to do? So a lot of it was, as I say, teaching clients, big clients like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Mars, how to make their comms more effective and also how to grow their brand with all of these scientific metrics.
Incredible. It sounds like maybe you didn't know it at the time, but you were really in at the deep end with some of the biggest brands and getting a lot of exposure. And so I'm sure that stood you in great stead throughout your career.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, as I say, the training part of things is vital. I think that's something that I've never had to. You always have to have it when you work, because you might not be presenting to clients and debriefs, but you're always talking to people. Ultimately, as a researcher, you're trying to get your message across, you're trying to influence people. So I think knowing how to present well, I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, but knowing how to present well and how to put your point across is absolutely vital. And I think doing that quite early on, maybe at quite a big level, more than I should have done, I think does then set you up in quite a good way.
And interestingly, your career being relatively new, you were quite quickly into a world of COVID. What impact did that have on your experiences as you developed with MarketView?
Yeah, it's a good. I've not really thought about it too much. I mean, I had six months. I started working in September 2019, so I had 6 months, 5 or 6 months before COVID. So I do remember what it was like to work in the office. I sometimes feel a bit bad / weird towards people slightly younger than me whose experience is entirely COVID based. They probably don't remember any in-person working. So it was nice to have a bit of that, a bit of normality before I think the world changed. I wouldn't say it changed my job too much. I think research, luckily, a lot of it is online, and it means you can do it from anywhere, even if people are stuck at home. But I do remember using that period, I think, quite well, because as an agency, I'm sure like other agencies, we struggled, and there was a big question as to, can we get as much work as we can because clients have less money? So we did some really interesting talks in that period, where I think it was with Hershey, the big food brand. We set up a series of weekly talks that weren't really linked to the work itself, but linked to psychology, linked to behavioural science, and it was just a way of getting their employees engaged and it sounds very cliche, but just like giving them something fun when the world was not so fun.
Absolutely.
And again, that was a really interesting piece of or set of work, because it really taught me the importance of reading around your subject. So a lot of the talks we did were around how evolution can help us understand shopping behaviour. We did talks about research and the gap between what people say and what people do. Yeah. We did talks around the science of emotion. So all of that stuff, which is not really linked to your day job necessarily, but I think it really showed that people do like this and they are interested in it. And so if you can be interested in it and present them in a compelling way, then people will listen, and it's a nice add-on to have to your skills.
And undoubtedly incredibly educating for you in your career. Fabulous. And it seems like the first sort of big career decision you had to make was when you changed agencies. What were you going through your mind? What were you looking for, thinking about at that point in time?
I think probably wasn't thinking as much as people might think. It wasn't that considered decision. I think throughout my career, I've always tried to think, am I enjoying this? Am I learning? And if yes, then great, keep doing it. But if not, then probably not. And I'd learned a ton of stuff at Mountainview, but I feel like because it was maybe a slightly smaller team, I felt like I was doing quite a lot of the same thing, and I could have definitely conditioned those skills a bit more and got really good at it. Yeah. But I thought I can try and learn something a bit different. And as I say, the work was quite academic, but also quite research heavy. And I thought, okay, I'll try my hand at a research agency. So I joined Basis, which is a big research consultancy, lots of different specialities, but I was very much focused on the quant side of things. Yeah. And that was, I think, a really cool, almost wake-up call to what research looks like and how clients commission research, how you as the agency then respond. I remember thinking actually the first week I got there that the level of analysis was much higher than anything I'd seen before, because you're getting these massive data tables. I hadn't seen a survey that was that long before, which you could argue is not a good thing, but you get these massive data sets. And I remember being in a meeting where people were just going through different groups, different questions, cutting this by cutting that. And I hadn't really done that to the same extent before. I think all of that demographic stuff, where my previous job, you didn't really consider it because it was a whole market view, suddenly becomes really important. So that was a really interesting step into what research looks like. So yeah, to come back to your point, it was never, I know I want to do this. It was, I want to try something new and let's go for it. Yeah.
And so you did a few years with Basis, clearly got a much deeper understanding, both sounds like from the commercial side, but also the depth and breadth of getting involved in that data and finding great insights. And then you make the move from agency side to client side. Was that also a natural progression or more considered?
I think slightly more considered. I think the same logic that I felt I'd learned a lot. I was maybe learning a bit less than I had at the start, wanted something new. And I'd heard from a few people that client side's different, it's fun, it's enjoyable. So I thought, okay, why not? I'll try that. There were quite a lot of different companies hiring. It's a tough market, and I didn't get that many. But the Met came up, and I thought that looked like an amazing role. And it has been a really good insight into how research works from both sides of the fence, you could say. I mean, it was very much doing the work at an agency, and now I'm commissioning it, doing it to some extent because we're quite a small team, which I'll come on to, but you do get to see it from different sides. And I think it's such a healthy thing to do if people can do both, because I genuinely remember the first meeting I had with an agency when I was at the Met in my first week, and I felt like I'd learnt more there about what makes a good agency and what makes a good presentation than I had 2 years agency side, which you think doesn't really make sense, but just immediately being on the other side, I think gives you a perspective which is completely different.
And I imagine you have a lot of empathy as well for the agency world, the understanding of how that works.
Yeah, exactly. And I think going agency to client or client to agency, whatever order, I think is a massive benefit. And empathy is a good point to make, because quite often when you're agency side and you see a client and they say, can we have this by this date, you often think, oh, annoying client. But then when you're on the other side, you've realised that everyone's got their own pressures. That might be coming from a person very high up who needs it urgently. It's not necessarily the client's fault. They're just trying to do their best as well. So it does make you see the whole system together and think, okay, I see it might be an issue here, as opposed to this person is not doing their job very well.
Yeah. So the Met fascinates me, right? We can think about many big consumer brands, and it's really quite obvious what they might be wanting to research. I would love to understand as much as you can share. So paint us a picture of the sort of work you're doing for the Met and how that's having a positive impact.
Yeah, so in the Insights team, we sit within a wider comms and engagement team, which is about 100 people. Yeah. And that encompasses a lot of different roles and areas of expertise. And our job in Insights is really just to make all of that a bit more evidence-based and a bit more effective. Sure. So that could be with the social media team, improving their comms that they put out on Instagram and TikTok, things like that. We've got a big internal comms team, which tells the 40,000 officers in the Met what's going on. That's a really important component as well. We do a lot of ad hoc campaigns like recruitment, which is obviously massive, because if you don't have the staff or the officers, then your organisation won't work. Yeah. We have a big press team. Something I hadn't realised, maybe naively until I joined, is that whenever you see in a newspaper article, the Met Police has said, that is someone, a human, responding, and that's obviously a big decision as to what you say and how you say it, or whether you respond at all. So all of these different elements, it's our job to, I think, make them more effective. And as an organisation, I think the Met is fascinating, and I'll come on to talk about why. But from an insights point of view, it's been really interesting because we're just 2 people, and I was really brought in to build the insight function basically from scratch, which has been great. I mean, it's arguably not good because there's no frameworks or anything to use, but I would say it's been great precisely because there are no frameworks. So I've just been able to carve it out exactly as I want it to, really. So, came in, I thought we probably need to understand our comms a bit better. Let's create a comms tracker. We need to understand how internal comms works. So we set up different frameworks that we can use to understand that. It gives you real license to create what you want and build it from the ground up. And using a lot of the agency experience I had, I thought, okay, I know what works better, what works a bit worse. I think that's one benefit of agency work, is that you do have quite a technical understanding of everything, and you've pitched to people, you've seen other techniques, other methods, so you know what works. So it's been a really fun experience. It's still very early days. I've only been there 7 months, and there's a lot more that I want to do, but it has been really fun building it from zero. And the other thing is, because it's so new, people are very receptive to it, and I think that's probably not always the case in other companies where you've got big established insights team. People might often not want to hear it, or they think we've heard this before, whereas here, luckily, everything we're doing is new and exciting, which makes the job a bit easier because, this data looks great, can we have more? And people are just really keen to hear it. So it's been a really, really fun experience.
I'd imagine, given the nature of the Met, you used a word earlier, providing evidence, right? That's pretty central to the core function of the Met. And also, I love the connection to the MRS with evidence matters, and matters more than ever in the 80th anniversary year. Talk to us a little bit about what fascinates you about the Met.
Well, as an organisation, I mean, having worked with lots of private sector consumer brand companies, I think the challenges are very much to do with competition and geographical expansion. So did a lot of work with Tesco before, and all they're concerned about, well, not all they're concerned, a lot of what they're concerned about are, what are Aldi doing, what are Lidl doing, what are Sainsbury's doing? They've got quality, they've got value, we're being pushed on both, how can we respond? They've also got to think about their different markets. They're big in the UK, but they're also big in other parts of the world. So there's just a lot more to think about. Whereas with the Met, there isn't any competition, for good or for bad. We're stuck with the Met. There's no geographical expansion because it's London-based. The other thing on that is that there is a ton of good data out there provided by the government. So we know very clearly who our audience is in terms of London. We can split that into boroughs, into wards, different demographics. So we have a really good sense of who our audience is. So in that way, it's the dream. It's a very, very contained problem, and you know who this audience is. But the downside is that, unlike other brands, the usage is not a good thing. And what I mean by that is, if you're Tesco, you want people to go into Tesco as often as possible, buy your brands, and tell your friends about it. With the Met, if people are using the Met, it's probably not a good thing. It's the sort of thing where you actually don't really want to come into contact with the police, because usually something bad has happened. So that makes it really interesting and really hard from an insights and commerce perspective, because we're relying on people actually not coming into contact with the Met. So you're then thinking comms is such a big part of it, because if like most people, you haven't been arrested, you haven't been a victim of a crime, then all you know about the Met is what you hear from news and from friends and family. So it does make it a lot harder, because to some extent they're relying on factors that you can't control. So that's why I think it's interesting. It's almost the reverse of a lot of the companies I've worked with, and it does make that comms element really challenging, because I think it's no surprise that if you hear things about the Met in the news, they're mostly negative. A lot of not only mainstream news sources, but social media sources are very disparaging towards the Met. I think a lot of it is not necessarily justified. Some of it might be, but it really means that we as the Met have to put out quite a lot to counteract it and to try and change the narrative, not in a sales and marketing sort of way, but just, as you said, to show evidence and show what's true, as opposed to what people are hearing, which quite often isn't true.
Absolutely. And I think the Met, like a number of organizations, they can do a huge amount right for a very long period of time, and one thing that is not perfectly right can be the press that everyone hears, right? So
Exactly.
a real challenge. Fascinating. No, takes me back to my early days of market research, looking at premium car insurance brands, and you realise that premium car insurance drivers are less likely to have an incident, and so less likely to claim, and so their experience with their provider is much smaller. So to garner the right insights from them is a challenge. So similar sort of problem there. And so Sam, if you weren't busy enough building a new insights department at the Met, you have a website on the side, Uncommon Threads. Would love to understand your inspiration for that and what the vision is behind it.
Yeah, so I would say it's very much a selfish passion project. I mean, it really came from working agency side where I felt like, and still do, creativity is such an underrated resource in research. I would do presentation after presentation to clients, and the thing that always stuck in their mind, the thing they really noticed, was not the 50 slides that they'd asked for. It was the couple of slides that we'd thrown in as a bit of inspiration. And it really made me think that creative thinking, creative inspiration is such a key part of research, because quite often it's the thing that clients can't access themselves. Yeah. They work on their brands 9 to 5 days a week. So they know what's going on. What they don't know is what other brands in their sector or outside their sector are doing. So I've always felt like it's a really useful tool, but at the same time I felt like it's very hard to access. So if you go on creativeinspiration.com, if that even exists, it's not very useful. There's quite a lot of generic examples. It seems to always be Nike and Apple, which are the ones that are held up. So I wanted to, mainly for me, create a database that would help me access creativity a bit more easily. And as I was going through it in the early days, I thought, okay, well, this could be something that other people could use as well, other researchers, other marketers, to help them make their presentations more interesting, make their pitch decks more interesting, make themselves more interesting, make their thinking more interesting. So it hopefully gives people a way of accessing that a bit more easily. And just to explain what it is, because it's not totally clear, it's essentially a database of creative examples. So I think I've got about 700 on there at the moment, just things that I've collected over time. And they're all categorized into different sectors, so whether that's sport, art, music, whatever it is. And they're all categorized into hopefully original ideas, so ideas you don't normally think about. So one might be, and it's relevant to what I said, one might be selfish innovation. And that's the idea that a lot of innovation just comes from solving personal problems. So quite often people think, well, how can I innovate? Where do I get ideas from? And actually you can just do that by looking inwards and thinking, what annoys me? And what's I think is really interesting when you look at that idea, for example, is how it looks in different sectors. So you see that crop up in comedy, for example, where Jerry Seinfeld, who you probably heard of, created his show by really just thinking, how does this annoy me? What do I get annoyed about in my day-to-day life? And let's put it in a show. You see that crop up in commercial brands. The owner of Deliveroo, for example, a guy called Will Shu, created it because he was an investment banker, working very late. Didn't like the food options. He thought, I'm going to do something about that. And then you also see that, my favorite example, you see that in history, where Henry VIII essentially created
yes, of course,
a new brand of the church so that he could get a divorce. So you see that idea crop up in loads of different ways. And what I try to do with the website is to show how these different ideas look across different sectors, and then how you can apply them in your own work and make your marketing or research work more effective.
So despite these great self-serving innovations, am I right in thinking that database is free to access?
Yeah, I should say, yeah. It's free, it's online. I'm not interested in making money from it. I just want people to see it and use it and enjoy it. So I've had some good feedback. It's often quite hard to know how people are actually using it, but if people are looking for ideas for the next pitch deck or presentation, it's definitely worth a look.
And where can they find it?
Online on commonthread.co.uk.
Fantastic.
Check it out.
Fascinating. And so there's a theme here that I'm seeing. You're clearly a bit of a self-starter. You're starting the insights department at the Met. You're building your own sort of offering back to the industry, and that giving back is fascinating. Is there an entrepreneurial spark in there somewhere that might come out one day?
Maybe. I do really like this idea of selfish innovation, to be honest. And I think a lot of what I've done is really just me thinking, I see a bit of a problem, a bit of a challenge, and I want to do something about it. So potentially, yes, in the future, but I often go day to day and thinking, if I spot that, I'm going to try and solve it. I'm not thinking too far ahead, but potentially one day could be my own venture.
And maybe that's a nice segue. I think I'm right in saying, Sam, you are standing to be elected for a MRS board position this coming year. Does sort of solving problems really play into what you're thinking about for what you could bring to that role?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when I was deciding should I apply, I probably thought, I don't have too much experience. I can't give as much as maybe other candidates do. But what I do think is that youth is really important in terms of having a diversity of opinion. And one thing that I've seen when I've been working in research is the biggest challenge in my view is attracting talent and getting people into the industry. When I was doing this careers evening that I mentioned the other week, I was asking people about market research and what they thought about it, and it's not a particularly good brand image. Sure. I'm not sure if you agree with that, but
Totally.
the name itself, the language we use, it's not really motivating people to join. I'd say most people haven't even heard of it as an industry.
Yeah.
And if we don't have the right talent, then we obviously won't have an industry that works, won't have the thinking we need to do what we need to do. So I think it is really important for us to try and appeal to new audiences. And a second point, as I mentioned, is I'm passionate about creativity and making sure that research does become more creative. So I was weighing up, should I apply, should I not? And I thought I do have something I want to give. I might not be the most experienced, but I think I do have a sense of what it's like to be a bit younger and applying to the industry. I have a sense of what it's like going through different phases, as I said, Mountainview basis.
Yeah.
I met different sides of research. So I've got a sense of what people think on all of those different, on all those different areas. So I am really keen to make a difference, and I thought, okay, I'll chuck my hat in the ring. And I've had some positive support so far. I think there's like you said, quite a lot of agreement. There are some problems
100%.
to fix. I think AI is another big one that we're trying to grapple with. Yeah. And again, not that I'm an expert in AI, I think we do need a slightly different perspective on how to tackle it. So I'm hopefully just providing a different point of view. The other candidates are very experienced and very knowledgeable, and nothing to take away from that, but it's hopefully just a different voice to add to the thinking.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating in holding both of those concepts, right? I actually saw what you wrote about that careers evening the other night, and this concept that when you say market research, people still think about clipboards, and yet actually we need to solve how we deal with the guidelines of AI, which couldn't be further from the mindset of clipboards. And so how we really tell the world what we do, and particularly that generation of talent that's coming through, I think is so critical that we do excite people and we do get the brightest minds into our industry. And I think we'll be in a better place for it as a collective. So yeah, fascinating positions there. So Sam, clearly a really intriguing career that you've had already, and I'm sure you would agree, sort of barely even getting started, right? When you take a minute, and there's not many minutes left in your day given everything you're doing, and you think to the future, are there any real components? I appreciate you're trying to work with the sector. You're working for an incredibly important organization as well. You're building your own knowledge and experience and giving back to the industry. But when you look a little bit further down the line, 5-10 years time, what do you see, if anything yet?
It's a boring answer, but I just don't think that far in advance. As I say, like, not necessarily day to day, but I know with the MRS, for example, that's something I really want to do. I want to make a lot more progress at the Met. I want to do a lot more with my website. And I feel like so far in my career, that mindset has worked quite well, not thinking 5-10 years in advance, but just thinking, am I enjoying what I'm doing? Do I want to make progress? And am I able to do that with what I'm doing at the moment? I mean, maybe if I were to pick one, I think one would be, as grand as it sounds, trying to reform the market research industry. I think, to pick up on what you said before, in a way it should be fairly easy, because I think we'd all agree, people who work in it, that there is so much interesting stuff that we do.
Huge amounts.
There is tons of different methods, methodologies, techniques, like amazing stuff that people do, and people outside just don't really know that. And to the point about clipboards and language, like, if you think about UX and insights and cultural understanding, I mean, one person, which I think I mentioned in the article, said, like, if I could do trend hunting for Nike, I'd apply for free. Like, that is part of research. So there's so much stuff in there that we could use to sell to people. and especially younger people who, obviously they're not a uniform group, but they have tons of interest in technology, in sport, in music, all of this stuff, which again, research does inform. So that I think is something, maybe not a 5-10 year goal, but at least in the medium term that I would love to do, is trying to transform it and to make it more attractive and not something that people either haven't heard of or think is boring, but something that is actually aspirational and makes people want to join.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Sam, you make such an interesting point there, really about encapsulating living in the moment. And I think as researchers, as understanding cultures, as being able to advise whether they're brands or their stakeholders or comms teams, etc., we have to understand the here and now. That is what our world is, right? And actually trying to wait and think about where we're going to be in 5 or 10 years' time. We can do our best with market research to guess where we might be, but I do still think there's a lot of guesswork, particularly 10 years out, particularly with the technologies that are coming through. So I think you make a great point there, and we can't get too ahead of our stations, particularly with the evolution of technology and the evolution of the world, shall we say, from a geopolitical stance. Really fascinating stuff. Sam, I'd love to close on 2 questions. The first question would be, what's the best piece of advice you've received in your career?
That's a tricky one, isn't it? I would say the one that always sticks in my mind, which is probably a good sign, is one that actually my brother gave me just before I started that internship at Ogilvy, which was treat each day like it's day one, which I think he's probably copied from Jeff Bezos. He's definitely not claiming that as his own, but it's always stuck with me because day one essentially means that you go in there and you want to impress as many people as possible. You want to be as proactive and helpful as possible. You want to do as much as you can and not just kind of let the work come to you. And I think that's so useful because very often as you adapt to a company or a role, you do get much more familiar with it and you know how things work. There's always a sense of routine and it's always very tempting just to be a bit passive.
Yeah.
But I think, especially as researchers, being proactive is such an important part of things. And I felt that when I was agency side in terms of being proactive with clients and always going above and beyond and suggesting new things, but I probably felt it more at the Met where there's actually not too much that comes my way. We do have requests and we have things that people want to look at, but my job is really thinking, okay, what should we do with this new insights function? So if you're passive in that job, you're not going to get very far. You need to constantly be thinking, how can I do better? And there have often been times where, not that I've been slacking, but I just felt, I haven't done too much this week or the last month. And I'd think, okay, day one mindset. And it does really help. It sounds a bit cliche and a bit like self-help like, but it does, I think, help you to focus and think, right, if I was my first day, what would I be doing?
Yeah.
Maybe it's just summarizing a little report that you've seen online and sending it out to people, takes half an hour. Maybe it's just thinking 6 months down the line, what else could we be doing? So just having that little flip makes you think, okay, how can I do the best thing that I can? So yeah, that'd probably be
I think that's fabulous advice. I was reading a CEO the other day wrote about a mindset that if you were hired today, despite how long your tenure had been in your job, and I think it's exactly that same mindset, and think afresh, right? Don't be held back by legacy and what's gone before. Really, really brilliant. And tough to move on from that. But my second question was, if you were giving either yourself or someone starting off their career, maybe more relevant because of how rapidly this world's evolving, and someone that is, we've convinced them to join the world of market research, they're on their first day, so they've definitely got first day mindset. What advice would you give them as they think about their career?
So I'd say two bits to that and slightly contradictory bits of advice, but I'd say the first is always be the most up to date with the data or the work itself. I think especially when you're junior, it sounds bad, but quite often the only thing one of the only things you're useful for is just knowing the data inside out, because people will come to you and say, what was that again? What was that number? And you have to know it better than anyone else. You have to know exactly how the research was commissioned, how many people you sampled, all these things. So if questions come up, you need to know it. So it sounds quite boring and blunt, but I just think being on top of the data, or if you're in a qual role, just being on top of everything to do with a research project, I think gets you really far, because as soon as people trust you with that sort of stuff, you get into more conversations and more meetings and people want you to be there because you have an important role. So I think when you're first starting out, I think just doing everything you can to stay on top of it is crucial, because a lot of people won't bother, so you can stand out there. But I think that the other thing, and it's probably no surprise given what we've said, is just thinking about creativity and thinking about your passions in more detail. I think as soon as you join the research community, you're often bogged down in conversations about sample size and surveys and questionnaire length, and it's very easy just to get wrapped up in the technical side of things. But I'd encourage people as much as they can to always look outside of it. If they are interested in sport or running, for example, think about that from an insights perspective. There's tons of stuff out there about running habits, more people are doing marathons, Ironmans, something like that. Follow it, pursue it, think about what it might mean in other sectors, really go above and beyond, even if the project you're working on has nothing to do with running. So slightly different bits of advice, because I'm basically saying know the data very well, but also forget about the data.
Yeah.
But I think it's that combination of both. It's like knowing how to do the work extremely well, but also knowing that the work is just one part of a much bigger picture that I think I would definitely encourage people to think about.
Fantastic. Well, Sam, it's been absolutely brilliant to get your view. I think you've got such a unique perspective, seeing so many different angles of this industry. Clearly a lot of passion. I love what you say about staying in the moment. I love that first day mindset. And I'm excited to see what you're going to do in this industry, and I think we'll be a better place for having you in it. So
Well, thank you
really
very much
appreciate your time.
Cheers, appreciate it.
Cheers, Sam.